What's up, everybody? So, I have looked and looked and looked for a video in regards to doing an oil change on an R50. And there's literally nothing. And there's a couple on the R75-5, which is a very, very similar bike, but still not anything on the R50. So if you have an R50 and you're wondering about doing an oil change, or you just bought an Airhead and you're wondering about doing an oil change, I figured I'd show you a simple video and the basics of doing an oil change on an Airhead, because it's in reality a very easy job. In fact, you don't need any fancy tools. If you even have the original toolkit that the bike came with, which is right here, literally has everything you need to use to do an oil change. So let's start with the basics, okay? Now, this is an R50/5, so it's a 500cc. Get yourself an oil pan. That is not an oil pan. If you have the opportunity to get an actual legit oil pan, by all means do it. I'm using what I found around in the kitchen, hilariously enough, because I can't find my oil pan. So, by using the basic toolkit, if you do have this, you're gonna see a fat Allen, kind of like this. This is what you're gonna use to drain your oil. Now, let's start with the basics. Where do you fill your R50? Well, right here. This is actually where you tell the depth, as well as where you add oil to the engine crankcase and pan. Now underneath, they have this out already, but right there is the drain, and it is a plug like this, and essentially is what you utilize to drain the oil right here. Now quantities, they vary. I would say a safe estimate is 3 quarts is what you want to plan for your R50. Now what I mean by 3 quarts is there's always a take plus or minus depending on what you utilize when you fill it up. So 3 quarts I usually plan for. Now you're gonna find an endless argument of what oil to use. You'll literally get 1,000 different answers. Oh, I use this. I mean, I've been using laundry detergent for the last 15 years in my R50. Whoop-de-doo. I don't really care what answer you get. A general oil or a consensus is to change your oil frequently. And what I mean by that is these are air cooled. So the primary goal is, it doesn't so much matter what oil you run, and I mean that in a lighthearted way. Yes, be diligent about what oil you run, but more importantly is to change these often. They're air cooled, they run at a much higher temp than your typical water cooled bike, and they're old. Oil degrades faster in these Airheads, so keep that in mind. I change my oil every 2,500 miles, sometimes 3 if I'm riding it not so much during the year, but 3 on the dot max, 3,000 miles, and change it frequently. That's what I mean, is it's more important how often you change the oil in these than what specific oil I run. So to answer your question, what oil to run, well, this is what I run. I run GTX diesel 1540. You're probably wondering, why are you running diesel oil? I run diesel oil in almost all my stuff. In fact, I usually run Shell Rotella, but there's a big shortage of Shell Rotella. And once again, I change the oil on my bike frequently, so it's not a big deal. So GTX diesel 1540. Now I've run 2050 in this before. 2050 works great. In my opinion, I think 1540 is the perfect viscosity for, especially in the summer and when you need to start it in cooler mornings. That little pump, oil pump flow port is not very big, so if the oil is super thick, that pump's working pretty hard when it's cold. The 2050 works great if you're in a really hot climate. Like I said, today I'm running 1540. So you saw where the oil drain port was. I'm going to show you where the oil filter location is. And once again, all these tools, you still have the original factory toolkit. Let me get a better light here. Okay, 3 nuts, I should say bolts, right there. So we're gonna undo these, and I'll show you the housing that's behind there. Now, you're gonna see a multitude of filters. Some are split in the middle, Others you will see are solid one piece, such as this, that have, what's important is these rubber gaskets right there. Those are what are important for the perfect seal. So I've had filters that are split in the middle, and also new updated ones are these, which are one piece. You want to change your filter with your oil. So let's go ahead and take off the filter housing now. One thing to keep in mind with these, when you take these off and you put these on, do not over tighten these nuts. When they heat up, they expand, and the next go around when you try to take them off is nearly impossible. A little more than hand tight is all you need on these. And this is not in the 20,000 miles I've put on this bike, this has never leaked by being hand tight nor come loose. So remember that. People tend to completely over tighten everything they have. And if you have a torque meter and you look up the actual torque specs, as well as the oil pan nut, as well as the oil filter housing, they're not very much. That's the biggest thing I would say, the issue people run into. They'll sit there and be cranking, trying to get these bolts loose, and originally they did not need to tighten this, or the previous owner did not need to tighten it as tight as they did. They just don't, because I have not done this in probably a year, because I hardly ride this bike in the winter months, and these were easy to get on and easy to get off, and they didn't leak a drop. So just keep that in mind. Do not over tighten these. So I'm just going to undo these. And keep in mind, I am using all the tools from the motorcycle toolkit, so they work quite good as they were intended to from the factory. All right, I'm gonna take these off. Now I just got done riding this bike. In my opinion, go ride it before you do an oil change. Get that oil nice and hot because it flows out of the bike much better than if it was dead cold. Some people might argue with that, and that's fine. I'm just giving my opinion of good luck I've had with. Okay, all three nuts are off. And then you just have this plate right here. I'm just gonna work it off very gently. Let's do not hurt the gasket that's behind there. Which I will straighten that back out. So here's the gasket. You just want to, and I would, if you have a chance to replace it, I've used this gasket for a little while. I mean, replace it if you can. Mine's still in good shape. You just want to make sure that surface area is nice and clean. I usually tend to wipe that off and make sure there's no debris in there. So this is your first removal. Next, you have the actual oil filter housing cap is what you call that. We'll go ahead and loosen that off and pull that out, and then we can extract the oil filter. Okay, so I got this nut loose. This is the oil filter housing. I'm gonna go ahead and I usually put a pan right here because you are indeed gonna get a little bit of seepage. All right, we're gonna take this guy out. Put that guy right there. I'm gonna take this guy out. And put that guy right there. You're gonna wanna keep your pan there, like I said, because as soon as you open up the air pocket here, you're gonna get some back drain out the pan. And you don't want to put your pan or your drain plug back in until you have taken this out, because you will always have some residual oil in the back. You want to get all that old oil out. That's the goal. All right, then we're gonna pull the filter out now. This one, sometimes if they're finicky, which this one, let's see. All right, using the trusty factory BMW pliers, we're just gonna pull this guy out. I'm just gonna do it real slowly. Make sure I got all the, and you'll get a little bit of drain right there as well, so keep that in mind. So when I was talking about the old style filter, that's what I meant. You might have the new version or the old version. They both will work the same. But there's your, if you're wondering. So if you bought one, you're like, wait, that doesn't look like this. Both these will work. What matters is that they have your seal. So your gasket, that's important. That's what allows the oil to flow through this filter, and dang you, I got oil in there. So keep that in mind. And what I like to do is I like to get a little oil, if you got some on your finger, and just want to rub that on the inside there so you get a nice lubricity to go onto the actual housing right there. And just kind of take a look, see if there's anything out of the norm. And then you'll insert this. You kind of always want to look to see if there's some filters I've seen that have flow design. This one does not. So you can put this in any direction. You'll essentially feed this right back into there until it kind of, you'll kind of feel it kind of click on. And that's when you know you got it correctly on in there. And then put your oil filter housing on. Tighten that up. Remember, hand tight, doesn't have to be super tight. And then make sure the surrounding gasket on this. If you have a replacement, replace it. If you haven't damaged the old one, which this one is still fine, I will use this. That's your oil filter. And then next up is we'll put the pan plug, your drain plug back on and fill it up. And then we'll see if she starts up. Okay, so I have just added oil, tightened up the drain plug. Remember, hand tight if you don't have a torque wrench. It does not be super tight. And I did just a little bit more than just about 3 quarts, did 2.8. I'm gonna start up the bike, look for an indication for the oil pressure warning light. Once that goes out, it means that the complete system has been charged pressure-wise with fresh oil. I'm gonna shut it off again and recheck my dipstick to add further. So you gotta keep in mind, your oil pressure or your oil filter housing is empty right now. So that's gotta fill with fluid, and it'll take away from what you did your first oil level reading on. And so you need to reapply more oil once it's filled, so then you know everything's evened out, if that makes sense. So let's start her up. Okay, so you've just topped off your oil. You want to check, I'm not sure if this will pick this up or not, but you're gonna look, see a minimum and a max on your dipstick. Unfortunately, my camera probably will not pick up on it just because the writing's too small, but you just wanna triple check that you are at the max level where it'll show max and minimum. And that is after you've ran it for at least 30 seconds so that the remaining oil has filled up the oil filter housing. But that's essentially an oil change on an R50/5. Now, if you have a different bike, such as an R75, it's identical, except that your oil quantity might just be a little bit more because it's a 750 rather than a 500. But it's very simple. Do not go to a dealership and spend the 120 bucks for an oil change when you can do it yourself for, this is 15 bucks, and an oil filter is 7 bucks. So under 30 bucks to do your oil change, and it took me 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It's very easy. And it kind of lets you be diligent about your bike, and it allows you to kind of double check anything else that seems out of the norm. And you know, if the most important thing to take away with an oil change is with these old Airheads is do it frequently. If you're only putting 500 miles a year on your bike, that's great. Still, change it at the end of the season and at the beginning of the season, because oil when it sits turns acidic and it's not good. So you want to put fresh oil in and change it frequently. If you are riding it, 3,000 miles is about the max you want to do. And you know, people will get all fancy with their oil. You got to run this, you got to do this. I'm running diesel oil and it works absolutely fantastic, and I've used it for years. And I run 1540. Castrol or Shell Rotella are fantastic brands. Some people like to run 4T. Oil is oil to me. When you're changing it frequently, that's what's the most important thing to do. And if you got any questions or comments, post them down in the comment section. And thanks for watching. I'm going to do another video on another Airhead that I have known as a Paris Dakar. Some of you might know what it is, and if you haven't, be sure to look out for that one. So thanks for watching, guys.